On Friday, AMD's share price shot up by over 7.5%. And what we have seen from this company over the last 6 months is very impressive because their share price has gone up by over 150%. And all of this heading into their earnings in just a couple of weeks. So today we're going to be talking about what is expected from the company in these upcoming earnings, as well as my expectations on what is important for investors to pay attention to when it comes to AMD. However, before we talk about AMD's earnings, I want to discuss the move that the stock made today, because again, it went up by almost 8% in a single trading day on the back of news that IBM said that they can use AMD's chips for quantum computing error corrections. I am no expert on quantum computing, so obviously fact check anything around quantum computing, but my understanding of how it works is it is supposed to be a lot faster technology than our current chips that are being used. We've seen a number of companies across the market actually go up significantly on the back of news that they could produce faster chips than what AMD and Nvidia are producing currently. However, quantum computing is at least a few years out from actually being viable. But if AMD can actually utilize their chips to correct some of the errors that they're seeing in quantum computing chips, that could be a big step in the right direction to getting quantum computing up to speed at a faster pace. And the quantum computing market is set to really be the next big jump in AI. All of the big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, are all focusing on developing their own quantum computing chips and technology to really start advancing AI even further. There's also a lot of individual companies that have made advancements and are solely focused on quantum computing, again, because the upside for this technology is massive. One of the most popular quantum computing companies out there is IonQ, and if we look over just the last year, their stock price is up by over 600%. So this technology is getting a lot of hype around it. However, it still has quite a ways to go. So if AMD is able to integrate their chips into how quantum computing is actually executed, that could be a big step in the right direction for the company. And my understanding of quantum computing chips is that right now there's a certain amount of error generated when utilizing these chips. And if AMD is able to partner their chips with quantum computing chips to actually correct this error, that could be a big move for AMD into the future. However, it's not likely going to affect their upcoming earnings announcement, which is expected on Tuesday, November 4th after the market closes. And for this earnings announcement, analysts are expecting the company to put up $1.17 of EPS. That would be an increase of over 27% year over year from 92 cents of EPS in 2024. And for top line numbers, analysts are expecting the company to put up $8.75 billion in Q3 of this year. That's an increase of 28% year over year from $6.82 billion in 2024. And in my opinion, I am more concerned about this top line number. This is going to be a dramatic increase year over year and even quarter over quarter. I think that EPS should come in very solid for this quarter. I think there's really no doubt about that. AMD is focused on their bottom line numbers. Their margins are continuing to stay strong. I think where I am more concerned is top line numbers. Are we going to see AMD come through with almost $9 billion of revenue this quarter? I think that is a little bit more of a question mark for the company. And the reason I think revenue is going to be a harder number to achieve is because this is Q2 revenue numbers. They put up $7.7 billion of revenue in the quarter. That was a 32% increase year over year from $5.8 billion in Q2 of 2024. If AMD comes through and puts up $8.75 billion in Q3 of 2025, that would be a quarter over quarter increase of almost 14% in revenue. And for AMD to increase quarter over quarter by 14% for their top line numbers, we need to see a lot stronger growth for their data center segment than what we saw in Q2. Because in Q2, revenue for their data center segment increased by only 14% year over year to $3.2 billion. We need to see a 50, 60, maybe even 70% increase year over year for data center revenue for AMD to achieve these top line numbers. The other issue for AMD in their Q3 earnings is a little bit of a perception problem because over the last couple of quarters, we've seen them grow their top line by over 30%. And in this quarter, it's projected that they will grow their top line by 28%. If they come in with only 25% growth year over year, that could be a little bit concerning for some investors, especially considering the fact that they are now comping against a much more difficult quarter. The previous two quarters where they grew over 30%, they were comping against very low numbers. However, in Q3 of 2024, revenue increased by over $1 billion from Q2 to Q3. So this comp is going to be a lot more difficult in Q3 and then also in Q4 of this year. What I think truly will matter for investors in this upcoming earnings announcement is guidance into the future, because AMD has announced a lot of deals over the last quarter that will have major impacts on their top and bottom line numbers. And I don't think that those are going to translate into numbers during this quarter. I certainly could be wrong depending on how fast they actually roll out this technology. However, I think what's going to be more important is what is guidance for Q4, and especially looking forward into 2026. How is the company talking about 2026? Are they talking about a lot of these big tech companies continuing to invest into infrastructure and partnering with AMD, or do they see some sort of pullback in spending? And in my opinion, I do think we are going to continue to see high spend on AI and AI infrastructure in 2026, especially with the talks continuing of interest rates falling throughout 2026. I do also want to point out that the company did guide for $8.7 billion of revenue during their Q2 announcement, so there is a very good likelihood that they will come in around this number. But again, it's going to be hard comps year over year over the next couple of quarters. But with the deals that AMD has been presenting, maybe in Q4, the company will provide guidance of them achieving over $10 billion of top line revenue. I would not be surprised by that at all, but I don't know how much of that investors have priced in. So that could be a big catalyst moving forward to see how much of these deals are actually materializing in the short term. But at the end of the day, what's most important for stock prices moving up is bottom line numbers. The only reason people invest in high growth companies is because they believe that those higher growth numbers will eventually translate to high growth bottom line numbers. And from AMD, we're kind of seeing that over the course of the last year. In terms of GAAP EPS in Q2, they went from 16 cents in Q2 of 2024 to 54 cents in Q2 of 2025. And honestly, non-GAAP numbers would have been even better, but they had a hit due to $800 million in inventory write-offs that they had to take during the quarter. I think we're going to see some very strong growth in Q3, and those numbers are going to again propel the stock price to even higher levels. And right now, AMD's bottom line trend is in a very strong upward direction. They currently have a trailing 12-month GAAP EPS of $1.75. That is still down significantly from where it was back in 2021 of $3.25. So if they can continue this trend and continue focusing on their bottom line while growing their top line, we could see this company easily get back to some of these $3 plus numbers for trailing 12-month EPS. If you take anything away from this video, it is that, in my opinion, investors should be cautiously optimistic about AMD. Yes, there's a bright future for this company, but also a lot of things are being priced into the stock. So make sure to keep those two things in mind. And you can see this very clearly when you look at the forward and trailing PE ratio. Their forward PE ratio right now, which is anticipated earnings over the course of the next year, is putting the company at a valuation of a 28.57. That feels fairly low. For AMD and how quickly they are growing, I could see them trading at a 30 to 35 forward PE ratio. However, keep in mind, again, this is based off anticipated earnings. If we look at their trailing PE ratio, based off their last 12-month earnings, they're trading at a PE ratio of a 101.63. This is a lot more aggressive. And basically, what all of this is telling us is that there's a lot of anticipated growth for this company. And that is also very clearly seen in their PEG ratio. Over the next 5 years, there's a lot of growth anticipated for AMD. The PEG ratio on this company is sitting at a 0.52. Anything below a 1 is deemed as a reasonable or a fairly undervalued company. So for AMD to be trading at a 0.52, it appears to be extremely undervalued. But that is because there's a lot of hype around what this company is going to do over the course of the next 5 years and how much of that is going to translate to their bottom line. Of course, we need to actually see that play out for their forward valuation as well as their PEG ratio to really be justified. And this optimism is very clearly seen from analyst expectations for 2026 because the average EPS estimate for non-GAAP EPS is $6.28 for 2026. That would be an increase of almost 60% year over year from the company's expected EPS in 2025 of $3.94. And alongside these strong bottom line numbers, analysts are expecting continued strength for top line numbers as well, putting up $42.1 billion of revenue in 2026, or an increase of 27% year over year from $33 billion in 2025. So like I said, I am cautiously optimistic when it comes to AMD. I do still hold my shares in the company. I have a small position in the YouTube portfolio as well as a larger position in my main portfolio. This is the YouTube portfolio, and right now it's sitting at a total value of just over $87,000. And right now, AMD is the second largest position in the portfolio behind Google. I hold 39 shares for a total market value of just under 10 grand. My cost basis, however, is only $3,100. So I am up over 200% on this position. That is just pure luck because I timed buying into AMD at almost the exact bottom back in April. Again, that is just luck. I'm not trying to brag about that. That was me just getting lucky getting into the stock right before it ran up. However, I have mainly been building out positions in the healthcare industry because I think right now, healthcare in 2026 is a lot more of a sure bet to go up throughout the course of the next year. But even with that, I don't plan to sell out of AMD. Even if earnings come in a little bit weaker, I think where we are going to see a lot more upside for the stock is over the next couple of quarters, Q4, Q1, and Q2 of 2026. I think those are going to be very important quarters for AMD to show that these deals that they've been putting up over the last quarter are actually materializing and having big effects on top and bottom line numbers for the company. But of course, that is all just my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Where do you think AMD is headed over the next year? What are you paying attention to during this upcoming earnings announcement? And what is your price target for AMD come this time in 2026? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. While you're down there, drop a like on the video and subscribe for more videos like this one. And as always, have a wonderful rest of your day.